Hello, Math 140 students. This is your instructor, Cindy Enrique. We are going to continue with Chapter 10. So we will be starting on page 5 for section 10.2. We are solving quadratic equations using quadratic formula. So here the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that is the formula that we really want to remember. It is used to find any quadratic equation. So here, sometimes we can't factor stuff, sometimes it's prime. So another good way to solve a degree 2 polynomial or a quadratic is by using the quadratic formula. So here we go. Let's identify some of the values here. So here I have that my a value is 1, that's a 1 there. My b value is a 5, and my c value is a negative 6. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it into that formula. And remember, we have that x is equal to, and it's a fraction, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So I have a negative, I have my plus or minus, and I'm going to have my b squared minus 4a times c all over my 2 times a. It really is a good habit to put in parentheses whenever you plug in a value. You are less likely to make a mistake that way. So I'm going to have my b value that I'm plugging in, which is a 5. So that is where the b goes. Next, I'm going to plug in my a value. My a value is 1. That's where all my a values are at. And then that last value here is c that I'm going to plug in, and that's a negative 6. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this into my calculator. So I have a negative 5 plus or minus. Now I'm going to do the inside, all inside my calculator. So I have parentheses 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 6. And I'm going to get a 49 all being divided by 2. So really this is a negative 5 plus or minus 7 divided by 2. So here I'm going to take my first equation. So that first equation is going to be a negative 5 plus 7 divided by 2. So I'm going to put this into my calculator. Negative 5 plus 7. And I'm going to divide it by 2. And that gives me that my x is equal to a positive 1. Remember, we are trying to solve for x. My second equation is going to be negative 5 minus 7 divided by 2. And I'm looking for my x value. So now my fraction, I have negative 5 minus 7, and it's all being divided by 2, and I get that x is equal to a negative 6. So I have that x is equal to a positive 1, and that x is equal to a negative 6 for my quadratic formula. For number 2, what's different about this one is that it's not equal to 0. So that's really, really important that you must set this equal to 0. So set equation equal to 0. So I don't know, maybe for that first step I would add the 25x squared to both sides. So that way I can get 0 on that side. Now to be left with a 25x squared plus a 10x plus 1. So here I would get that my a value is 25, my b value is a positive 10, and my c value is a positive 1. So again, I'm going to be using my formula. So I'm going to have x is equal to, now I'll go ahead and put in my parentheses, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my values. My b value here is 10 that I'm plugging in. My a value that I'm plugging in is 25. And of course that c value there is 1. So I'm going to have that x is equal to a negative 10 plus or minus, and I have 10 squared minus 4 times 25 times 1. And I get a square root of 0. And 2 times 25 gives me a positive 50. So I have negative 10 plus or minus 0 over 50. That plus or minus 0 kind of goes away. You don't need that. It doesn't add or take away from my value. So I have negative 10 divided by 50, which would give me a negative 1/5. So I have that x is equal to a negative 1/5. Okay? So I'm going to have one answer. So that's kind of interesting. So for the first example that we have here, we got two answers, but then in the second example, we only got one answer. You might be thinking, well, is that a coincidence? Do I know when I'm going to be getting one answer or two answers or no answers? And the response to that question as well, it will depend on the discriminant. So notice how the inside of the square root is this b squared minus 4ac. So that b squared minus 4ac, that stuff inside the square root is called the discriminant, okay? So the discriminant is going to tell us how many answers we are going to have. So if it's a positive number greater than 0, the quadratic has two real solutions. If exactly equal to 0, we have one real solution. And if it's a negative number, less than 0, then we say the quadratic equation has no real number solution. That's where the imaginary part kicks in. So let's think about this. It says find the discriminant. So you have to be really careful here. The key word here is discriminant. So when we think about the discriminant, we say, okay, well that's that b squared minus 4ac. So in this case, we have my a, which is equal to 1, my b, which is equal to a negative 5, and my c, which is a negative 14, because this equation was equal to 0. Okay, so now I'm going to plug in my values. So I have my b squared minus 4 times my a times my c. So what I'm plugging in for my b is a negative 5, and then for my a value is a negative 14, and my c value is a negative 5. So I'm going to plug this in. Negative 5 squared minus 4 times a negative 14 times a negative 5. And I get that my discriminant has a value of a negative 255. So when it's asking you how many real solutions does this equation have? Well, remember, if it's a negative number, we are here. So this is when I have a negative value. That means there's no real number solution. And for part C, it says, use the quadratic equation to find the solutions. So I know it's negative b plus or minus, and then the discriminant. But we already found the value of the discriminant. The value of the discriminant was negative 255. And I have it all over 2 times my a. But we already know from part B that there's no real number solution. So we say that this is going to equal to a non-real number solution. So we don't even have to plug in the rest of the values. We just know that it's a non-real number solution, meaning that it's going to be imaginary. So now, for example number 2, it says, without actually finding the solutions, determine whether the following equations have two distinct real number solutions, a single number solutions, or no real number solutions. So what this basically is saying is, hey, find the discriminant. And what is the discriminant going to tell us about our actual solutions? And that discriminant was that b squared minus 4ac. So for part A, it's equal to 0, perfect. So I have my a is equal to 3, my b is equal to 2, and my c is equal to a positive 8. So I'm going to have my b squared, that's 2, minus 4, my a value and my c value. My a value is 3 and my c value is 8. So my discriminant, when I plug in the values into my calculator, 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 8 gives me negative 92. Remember, when it's a negative value, that means I have no real number solution. Okay. So for part B, we're going to do the exact same thing. So it's equal to 0, so I can identify my A, B, and C values. So my A value is 4, my B value is negative 4, and my C value is a positive 1. So I know when I plug it into that discriminant, I have B squared minus 4A times C. So that value again is negative 4 for my B, 4 for my A, and 1 for my C. So I have negative 4 squared minus 4 times 4 times 1. So this is my discriminant, which is going to be equal to 0. Since it's equal to 0, if you remember, then I'm going to have 1, or better yet, a single solution. So I have a single real number solution. Okay. So for example number 3, it says to find the x and y-intercepts of this graph. So I know that if I'm trying to find the intercepts, I can just plug in 0 into some of these values. So let's say I want to find the y-intercept. So if I want to find the y-intercept, then what I do is that I let my x equal to 0. So then I have y is equal to 0, or here. I have x squared minus 2 times x minus 8. So what I'm plugging into my x value is 0. So I get that y is equal to a negative 8. So that y-intercept is really 0, negative 8. So 0, negative 8 is that y-intercept. And I went ahead and marked that on my graph as well. Now to find my x-intercept, that's going to be a bit more tricky, but still doable. So x-intercept. That is when you let your y equal to 0. So I'm going to have 0 equal to my x squared minus 2x minus 8. So whenever you try to solve a degree 2 polynomial, solve for degree 2, that's my exponent, there's a couple of things you can try. You can try to factor. You can use the quadratic formula. And the other thing that you can do is completing the square. So here, I'm going to try to see if I can factor. I'm not sure, but I'm going to try to see if I can. So I have x times x is x squared. To get 8, that's 4 times 2. Then to get that negative 2 would be a negative 4 and a positive 2. So then I have that x minus 4 is equal to 0. So x is equal to 4. X plus 2 is equal to 0. So x is equal to a negative 2. So my x-intercepts, I have to write them as an ordered pair, would be 4, 0. And I have negative 2, 0. So these are the two x-intercepts that I'm going to be graphing. So I have my 4, 0, which is here, and I have my negative 2, 0, which is here. So now I have my intercepts, and because it's a parabola, maybe the best thing next is to find the vertex. So find vertex. So hopefully you remember that the x coordinate of the vertex uses that formula negative b over 2a. So I have negative b over 2 times my a. So in this case, I have my a value as a 1, my b value as negative 2, and my c value as a negative 8. So my b value would be negative 2, and the a value that I'm plugging in is a positive 1. So I have a negative 2 being divided by 2, which is eventually going to give me a positive 1. So then my vertex, I know that that x coordinate, I have 1. I'm going to plug in that 1 into my original equation to get the y coordinate of the vertex. So remember, I have that y is equal to x squared minus 2x minus 8. So y is going to equal to x squared minus 2 times x minus 8. And that coordinate, or that value that I'm plugging in, is 1. So I end up getting that 1 squared minus 2 times 1 minus 8 is equal to a negative 9. So my vertex is positive 1, negative 9. So now I know exactly what my graph is going to look like. So that is going to be my graph. And I have labeled the x and my y-intercepts. Okay. So that was the end of section 10.2. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me.